So we have Janice Gardner. She is an interim executive director and a certified wildlife biologist at Sageland Collaborative based in Salt Lake City. She shares her passion for the Great Salt Lake and birds each spring and fall migration when she leads others to surveys Utah's portion of the Intermountain West Shorebird Survey. And then we're also joined by Max Malmquist with the National Audubon Society, who helps coordinate efforts with Sageland Collaborative. So I'll turn it back over to you two now. Thank you.
All right, so before we dive in, we do want to give some acknowledgments. So for the Utah portion of this project, we want to thank our funders, the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council and the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, and their Great Salt Lake Research Grants, as well as Tracy Aviary and their conservation grants. We have had considerable contributions from our own organizations, Sageland Collaborative, National Audubon Society. We really wanted to highlight our partnership with the Division of Wildlife Resources and the Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Program. They have provided major in-kind match for this program, from helping us at the get-go with our survey design to conducting aerial and airboat and ATV surveys. We could not have accomplished what we have so far without the division. And this is a regional program, so outside of Utah, we have received funding for this project from the Fish and Wildlife Service. It's become a priority for the Pacific Flyway Council, which is an administrative body of public wildlife agencies that help or support coordinated conservation of migratory birds. And we have over 70 organizations across 10 other Western states that we've partnered with to help make this program possible. So the Intermountain West, or the interior portion of the Pacific Flyway in North America, contains wetland habitats that are critical stopover sites for many species of shorebirds. And these shorebirds, they use these sites for a few days or a few weeks or sometimes a few months during both spring and fall migration. But without places like Great Salt Lake, simply put, shorebirds could not complete their migratory journeys. They need these places to stop and rest and refuel. So the overarching goal of this program is to evaluate migratory shorebird distribution and abundance at Great Salt Lake and across the Intermountain West region in order to provide a foundation for management of resources for shorebirds. And shorebirds are notoriously difficult to monitor. They're hemispheric birds. A lot of these species in the winter, they're in Central and South America. They're spread out during the breeding season across massive landscapes in the Arctic. And migration provides us with this unique opportunity where they funnel through this more defined landscape, these stopover sites. And it allows us the opportunity to get a decent estimate on how their populations are doing. But what makes this really difficult is that you have to have people out surveying these sites all at the same time. And with this project, we have 3 scales of questions that we're trying to answer. So first, the regional scale. What sites are shorebirds utilizing and why? How does this compare to historical averages, and how has wetland habitat and surface water changed over time? What is the value of a particular site compared to others? And then we zoom in, and so second, we have the Great Salt Lake ecosystem. What sites on Great Salt Lake are shorebirds utilizing and why? This is especially important because we are faced with making decisions about what wetlands get water, when, and how much. And we need information to inform management and policy decisions. And then third is the individual wetland site, and currently at 2 of our wetlands, we are further breaking down survey boundaries into management units so that we can understand defined areas that shorebirds are using and how that correlates to management actions like Phragmites treatments that you just heard about next door. And so this is our project area. And believe it or not, we are not the first ones to do this. We are replicating efforts from the early 90s, 1989 to 1995. Point Reyes Bird Observatory, which is now Point Blue Conservation Science, who's one of our partners on this program, they surveyed 162 sites in 7 western states in the Great Basin. We have expanded now to over 200 sites in 11 western states to fill out the full interior portion of the Pacific Flyway.
Okay, so what does this look like here in Utah? So Sageland Collaborative has been working on the Utah portion of this larger survey that Max has been helping manage on the regional scale. So here in Utah, most of our shorebird survey sites are around the Great Salt Lake ecosystem. So we cover all of the shoreline and also the wetlands that are so important to the Great Salt Lake ecosystem. We also have the Fish Springs National Wildlife Refuge, the Amalga Barrens Sanctuary up in Cache County, and then we circumnavigate Utah Lake as well. This amounts to 800,000 acres of land that we've got our partners and volunteers surveying for shorebirds. That's the size of Rhode Island. And on a few of these sites, we're drilling down even further and doing a little bit more intensive surveys. And so these are larger survey areas that we're breaking up into management units that correspond with the work that folks like Keith Hambrick at Forestry, Fire, and State Lands and our awesome wetland managers at the waterfowl management areas are doing to control Phragmites, so we can understand a little bit more about shorebird use coming back from these areas that have been restored. Okay, so what does this look like when we have 120 people out across Utah on one big day? Across the region, we have these short survey windows that correspond to peak migration seasons, and that's based on data that's been crunched from past migrations. We rely on our amazing partners at Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, like Max said. So we've got folks out in airplanes, airboats, ATVs, on vehicle, on foot, and I'm seeing lots of our volunteers right here. So we're so appreciative of your efforts. Folks receive a training so they know exactly how to do the survey to make sure that we can count birds, but also be safely while doing it. And it's a great day, and guess what? You all can participate, so come see Sageland Collaborative's website if you're interested in participating in this survey. Okay, so I'm going to go over some of our results, which is really exciting, but a few caveats, if you will. As you all know, when we started this survey, so August 22, so that was last fall. August is actually the time of shorebird migration. Feels like summer to us, but it's fall migration for our shorebird friends. We were at the peak of the mega drought, and yeah, it was a tough time. I will share personally, it was a very tough time for me going and spending time on the lake to seeing how truly dry and decimated the lake was, and knowing how close we were to losing our brine shrimp and brine fly friends. And then this past spring, when we did our April 23 survey, right, whiplash, we all experienced it firsthand, especially all you professionals. We had record runoff, and in some places, we actually found we had so much water in wetlands that it actually was no longer great shorebird survey, or shorebird habitat anymore. The results that we're presenting are, we'll say raw, they're uncorrected. However, everything is apples to apples across both our Utah sites and our peers in other states, so we can still look at this on a relative basis. And then when Max shares some of the regional stuff, the regional counts, our current day survey, we actually are surveying a few more, about 30 to 40 additional sites, so keep that in mind. All right, so I'm going to share some of the results from Great Salt Lake. When we started this, like I said, last fall, this is what the water on Great Salt Lake looked like. So this is the wetland evaluation tool, which came out of Patrick Donnelly's lab at the Intermountain West Joint Venture. If you want to get lost on your computer and lose an hour of your life, this wetland evaluation tool is super fun. You can look at surface water across the entire West on amazing time scales. So really cool, but August 22, the dark royal blue is where the surface water was in Great Salt Lake. Despite that, we still had shrimp and brine flies, and the wetlands were still supporting a lot of habitat for shorebirds. And this was amazing. So our first survey, we counted nearly 230,000 shorebirds. So again, thank you to all the participants. You all individually helped with that. That represented 29 species of interest, as 3/4 of those birds were counted on lands managed by Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. So that's those sovereign lands, if you just heard Keith describe what that means. Phalaropes wilsons and redneck phalaropes was our most abundant shorebird. American avocet the second. So I'm just going to focus on overall shorebird counts. If anyone's interested in like some species-specific stuff, you can reach out to Max and I. But this is the kind of maps that we can produce. So here's the Great Salt Lake ecosystem. On this map, the darker green means more shorebirds. The dark purple means less. And then areas that are in crosshatch means we counted 0 birds. There was 0 birds there. You know, things that are interesting to me, you know, Farmington Bay is clearly a place a lot of shorebirds are using. And surprisingly, the west side of the Great Salt Lake, lots of microbial lights there, brine flies, and that's where we're seeing a lot of our phalaropes hanging out. So not a lot of people spend time out there, but apparently of high value to our shorebird friends. Okay, so then the winter happened. This is me shamelessly sharing one of my awesome days at Alta. And these are my dogs. They're wiener dogs, so that picture's misleading. They're already really short. But this was incredible. I mean, every time I was out skiing and enjoying the snow, like I was thinking about our shorebirds and the lake. And maybe you all were too. Every time I pulled up the Doppler and there was like a big green blob over the Great Salt Lake of rain and snow, it was like, yes! Because I thought a lot about what it was going to be like when we entered into this year. Were we going to be counting dead shorebirds? Were we going to be counting just 0 shorebirds? Just to be able to experience this firsthand was kind of jarring. So here we are. This is what the surface water looked like in April of 23. So again, that royal blue color, tons more water. And in spring migration, we had 84,000 shorebirds, 23 species. American avocet turned out to be our most abundant. Less phalaropes that we counted on this survey. And again, forestry, fire, and state lands, and also the Division of Wildlife Resources waterfowl management areas were really priority areas for shorebirds. And here's again what the map looks like. So areas in that dark green are where a lot of our shorebirds are hanging out. And now we are to our most recent survey, which just happened this past August. And a little bit more water than last year, but the water's come down since the spring. And we actually counted more shorebirds this past fall than we did last fall. So that was, for me personally, just amazing and really exciting that the Great Salt Lake is still sustaining shorebirds. And again, phalaropes were a very abundant species, similar to the first fall, with avocets being our second species. So here's a map for all you folks to digest. Again, the western side of Great Salt Lake has a lot of shorebird use. Places like Farmington Bay also have a lot of shorebird use as well. And here's just a quick example of what the types of detailed maps that we can do as we're working with our wetland managers. So we can talk about how many shorebirds are using these different management units. And what we can do is we can track this as folks like Keith are removing Phragmites from these units. We can see how the shorebird use changes, and we can help justify all the very important dollars that are going into getting rid of the evil Phragmites, because this is truly like a little ray of sunshine that we can bring back these habitats from the grasp of Phragmites. So we're really appreciative of our partnership with Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. Okay, I'll turn it over to Max to talk about some of the regional results.
Thanks, Janice. Yes, we're gonna look at some of the preliminary regional results in comparison to Great Salt Lake. So this is a map of our pilot surveys from August of 2022. We were just starting the program up. We really were focusing on areas where we had capacity, as well as the sites that we know historically were important to shorebirds. So if you look at this map, there's little tiny gray squares. Those are some of our sites that we did not survey that season. There are also little gray circles. Those are sites that we surveyed that did not have any shorebirds, so we had a 0 count. And then all the red dots you see, those are sites that had shorebirds, and the size of the red dot is in relation to how many birds were at that site. Big takeaway here, even though it was our pilot surveys, Great Salt Lake hosted about 51% of all the shorebirds in the region.
Pretty cool, huh?
Thanks, Janice. And fast forward to this spring, you'll see there's a lot more red dots on the map. This is when we fully built out our partnership network, expanding into the peripheral areas, Washington, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado. But again, shorebirds in the spring, they're in a rush. They're trying to get to their breeding grounds, so they're here for a much shorter period of time. So it's typical for numbers to be lower in the spring. Some of them skip right over us, but again, Great Salt Lake, 46.5% of all the shorebirds counted in the region.
Yeah, the dot size, we couldn't make the dot size quite as relatively large because it would cover up like most of Utah, so.
And then this is from our most recent survey in fall. And we, of course, much more water on the landscape. You can see, of course, again, Great Salt Lake, a lot of shorebirds. Interestingly here, though, I wanted to point out, if you look at Salton Sea, 250,000 shorebirds. In the historic surveys, the maximum count in fall at Salton Sea was 105,000 shorebirds, so 2.5 times. And for those of you who are familiar with Salton Sea, much like Great Salt Lake, the lake level is, or the sea level is declining, the biota is changing, the salinity levels are changing. Apparently, there's more shorebird habitat and food resources there. So, this is a great example of what we can show with this program, is these shifts in shorebird abundance and where they're distributed across the region.
I also see a competition brewing
I know,
between us
right?
and Salton Sea. But
Yep. So just a quick look at some of the region-wide comparisons from the historic surveys to now. So fall migrations, 89 and 95, the median count was 670,000 shorebirds. Fall migration 2022, again, we hadn't surveyed the entire area or project scope, but 360,000 and then 608,000. So lower, but this past fall with a lot more water on the landscape seemed like maybe the shorebirds responded to that. So decent numbers in fall. And then spring migration, we have one data point, it's very wet, but less than half of the median from the historic surveys. And this is another map of the wetland evaluation tool that Janice shared. This is the average surface water coverage of Great Salt Lake during the decade when the historic surveys occurred. So you can see much more water across the landscape. A couple of species-specific comparisons looking at birds at Great Salt Lake during fall migration. Black-necked stilt, American avocet, marbled godwit. These are 3 species that heavily rely on Great Salt Lake in the fall for staging and molting. And you'll see that our numbers are considerably lower. And then interestingly, phalarope numbers, if you look at the maximum count from the historic surveys, both during our fall migration of 2022 and 2023, much higher than the maximum count from the historic surveys. All right, so what's next? As we continue to conduct surveys over the next couple years, it's our plan at least to survey through 2025. We plan to refine our counts and our estimates. We will have more robust regional comparisons, and we'll use that Intermountain West Joint Ventures wetland evaluation tool to compare our counts to surface water coverage across the region. Here at Great Salt Lake, we will compare shorebird distribution to Phragmites mapping, coverage, and management. And then we're also working with Westminster's Great Salt Lake Institute to coordinate our shorebird surveys with their brine fly research. And of course, ultimately, we hope that these data will help prioritize wetland and water management, both locally here in Utah and across the region.
Okay, with that, thank you very much. And again, a big appreciation for all our amazing partners and especially all the volunteers that I'm seeing in the crowd today. We really can't do this without you. And we've got plenty of time for questions. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, question there.
So just to repeat the question, he was asking about brine flies and thinking about Farmington Bay. It's more brackish, freshwater. It does have brine flies, but not nearly like the South Arm ecosystem. So he's asking about looking at midge populations, other macroinvertebrates that the shorebirds use. And that is something I know, David, you've been studying the macroinvertebrates for a while now in Farmington Bay. And I think that is, with this project developing and with other research going on around the lake, I think that's definitely something that we want to look at, is thinking about bioenergetics and how many shorebirds that utilize those food resources, how many shorebirds can we support in these different areas of the lake. So definitely something that we're thinking about. And I know the Division of Wildlife Resources, they are looking at bioenergetic studies for shorebirds at Great Salt Lake.
Yeah, question back there. Well, so the question is, where can you access this research? Is it published? So we are actively trying to keep up with the analysis of this and getting these data sets out to the public. Right now, this data set is widely available to our partners, but stay tuned. Hopefully there will be, peer-reviewed research coming out of this, and getting this into the hands of the policymakers that have some really difficult questions to answer and decisions to make about where water is going on the lake. So hopefully they can be made using data about which sites are the most valuable to our shorebirds. Yeah, I'll start down here. Yeah, so the question is about how the number of people out counting the shorebirds could impact or bias the numbers. Is that about right?
And also whether
Yeah.
that number increased or
Yeah. Yeah, so when I said this is like raw data, like we haven't done any kind of like bias or assumption, calculations yet. But we have, on each survey area, we have teams of 3 to 4 people that are responsible for counting the shorebirds. And that's a similar method across all the wetlands. So we hope where there is bias, at least it's somewhat evenly distributed. So, and that same methodology is used across all of our the Intermountain West sites. So.
And I would note, outside of Utah, with the regional surveys, we started that pilot year. We probably had 100 plus volunteers and participants in Utah. Overall, we probably had around 230, 250, and now this last season we're up well above 300.
Yeah. So I'm going to pop back to one of these maps here to kind of illustrate that. So the question is like, what's the distribution difference like between basically like the lake shore, the classic, if you go to the shore of the Great Salt Lake, we're talking about a saline lake, versus our wetlands, which are freshwater, brackish wetlands. So this is the kind of questions that we can now answer. We have the apples to apples comparison of where shorebirds are using. This is all shorebirds combined, and I described that this is about 3/4 of the shorebirds are phalaropes. They are known to feed on brine shrimp and brine flies. So this a map like this is a little bit weighed by phalarope behavior, but you can see that like the west side of the lake bed itself contains a lot of shorebirds, but some of like the WMAs that you're talking about here, like Farmington Bay WMA, Howard Slough, Ogden Bay, they've got shorebirds in 500 to several thousand, compared to right here, this is like a count of 88,000 shorebirds were counted out on this, is this Carrington Island area?
Yes.
Carrington Island, so. And we can thank John Neal and John Luft for being in an airplane and counting those birds. I mean, those guys. 88,000 birds in one little spot, how you count that? Yeah.
And I would just add to that, water depth with shorebirds is massive. I mean, they're adapted to different depths of water. And so, right now, a lot of our waterfowl management areas, they have kind of deeper submergent, emergent vegetation wetlands. Whereas, if you go to like Antelope Island Causeway and you look south in Farmington Bay, there's this kind of gradient, and you have really shallow, you have wet mud flats all the way down to deeper water. And those are the areas, kind of the unimpounded eastern bays, where it seems like we're having, really high counts and diversity of shorebirds beyond the phalaropes.
Back there.
Seems like Magcore was out there. Does that affect the bird population?
I mean, so the question is does Magcore affect the bird population? I mean, I'm not a shorebird, but if I think about a place I don't want to hang out, it's near Magcore. But this is what's really interesting is, I mean, I'm really fascinated by the number of shorebirds, and I don't know if, it's hard to have the relative appreciation for, one site along the Great Salt Lake compared to others. But that's, the west side of the Great Salt Lake has a lot of microbialites, which are, the coral reefs of the Great Salt Lake that our brine flies are growing on. And I think that's what's driving a lot of that. That's where the food is, So I guess a little chlorine fumes. I don't know, I'll stop there. Back there, Jess. Yeah.
So the question was, what about the data surprised us the most? And I think, again, Janice mentioned the caveats with this program. You think we started in the peak of the mega drought. We had this super incredible wet year with record-breaking snowpack in the Wasatch and the Sierras. And, going from this super dry, these super dry conditions across the entire West to, so our first fall, and then looking at fall of 2023 when we had this year where there's so much more water on the landscape, and seeing how the numbers jumped, I think that was really interesting. And you think about shorebirds and habitat and shallow surface water and food resources. I think it was interesting to me to see like the change in the numbers and the increase, and potentially it's a response to some of our local breeders like avocets and stilts having a successful breeding season because there was more habitat. I don't know if that's true or not, but looking at those comparisons in the fall, I think are really interesting and surprising to see the difference.
Yeah. I knew that Great Salt Lake was important to shorebirds, but this is what's so amazing is like the Great Salt Lake ecosystem is holding half of our region's shorebirds during migration. That's amazing. And to think what happens if we lose the ecosystem, that's really scary. And that has implications for populations. So we've still got a few more minutes, yeah? Okay, yeah. Back there. Yeah.
So we do, for this survey, we do the entire lake by airboat, and we do have a few walking transects as well. But yes, that other dot south of Great Salt Lake, that is Utah Lake.
Yeah.
The other one is Fish Springs National Wildlife Refuge.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, interesting, right? Utah Lake was holding some shorebirds last fall, and you can kind of see how those numbers have shifted a little bit. So.
That's difficult. There's a lot of water rights holders, and Utah Lake, the lake level is, it's managed very specifically for, other reasons other than for people and irrigation and other purposes. And, I think a lot of the work that Forestry, Fire, and State Lands are doing with Phragmites control and, trying to create habitat and, open up areas along the shoreline, I think that could really help shorebirds. But of course, managing the actual lake level itself, I think, is more up to us, and whether or not we can do that is an entirely different question. So,
Yeah. I think we have time for one more, maybe? Yeah. Yes, you, sir.
So the question was, if you were to change kind of the habitat type, like in Farmington Bay, for example, would the birds go somewhere else? Right. I think that's one of the big questions that we're trying to answer. If you look at just Great Salt Lake data, that tells you something, right? But understanding how the birds are distributed across these other wetland sites, and we're also trying to understand with some other programs that are in parallel to this how birds are moving in between sites as a network. But I think that's something we don't really know yet for sure. Between different wetland sites at Great Salt Lake and then some of these other sites on the map, we're hoping that we can start to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up saying, when places like Great Salt Lake are suffering, there's kind of this mentality. It's like, oh, well, these migrating shorebirds, they're making decisions, and they will just carry on to another wetland site. But like this is the map from 22, and a lot of these gray dots on here, Max personally surveyed, the wetland's gone. So as shorebirds need to find another place to go, can they even make it to that next stop? Can they find another place? And if they don't, they die, and the population suffers. So I think this is the value of a project like this, where you do have like a real-time snapshot to be able to compare apples to apples. So, because those assumptions I don't know if are true anymore, because all of our other saline lakes are also hurting. So it's not like just Great Salt Lake is suffering, all the other ones as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Janice and Max. That's all the time we have for questions for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.